I can still taste my mum's fresh-baked bread, the sweet honey and warm wheat from the fields around Little Ashcombe, just before the church bells tolled for morning prayers. It's funny how some memories sneak into your mind at the oddest moments. Like now, as I'm standing in the armory of the old fortress on Hadley Moor, watching the crimson paint dry on my steel breastplate. It's been 437 years since I last tasted bread like that. Since I was called anything other than Brother Cassius of the Crimson Raven's Third Company. People tell stories about us. The Emperor's chosen. Angels clad in blessed steel descended from his own bloodline to guard humanity from the darkness beyond the stars. In picture books and stained glass windows, we shine like silver saints, bolters singing hymns as we cut down heretics and worse. The propaganda feeds speak of glory and honor, eternal vigilance. But what they never tell you is the price. To become an angel, you must first forget you were ever human. I was just 11 when Chaplain Morley came to our village. 11 years old, playing war games in the wheat fields with my little brother Matt, while Mom and Dad worked the harvest. The sky had the dull, rusty color of an old penny that day, heavy with the promise of rain that never came. The drought had lasted 6 months, and the council's tithes remained stubbornly unchanged. Folks started whispering things that had earned them a flogging back in London. But out in Ashcombe, desperation loosens tongues. Just after midday prayers, the thunder began. Not the usual rumble of weather, but something deeper, mechanical. Matt and I scrambled up the old grain silo to get a better look, our fingers gripping the rusty ladder as we climbed toward the sound. What we saw changed everything. 12 drop pods hurtled through the sky like shooting stars, their retro thrusters carving bright scars across the copper sky. They landed around our village in a perfect circle, careful not to damage the harvest. When the smoke cleared, the ramps lowered, and out stepped giants, Space Marines of the Crimson Ravens chapter. Even at 11, even as a farm boy who'd never seen anything scarier than a fox, I knew what they were. The Adeptus Astartes, the Emperor's chosen, angels of death. Watching them stride through Ashcombe with their massive frames casting long shadows across the dust, I felt something new. Terror. They were too tall, too perfect, too distant from anything human. Their armor hummed with embedded hymns as they moved, and every step shook the ground beneath us. Their voices boomed through vox amplifiers, turning simple words into divine edicts. They announced they'd come for recruitment. The Crimson Ravens needed new aspirants, and Ashcombe had been chosen. Mum wept when they called my name. Not tears of joy, but something deeper, a quiet mourning. She knew what the rest of us were just beginning to understand. Her boy would leave that day but never come back. What returned, if anything did, would wear my face but carry none of my heart. The selection was brutal and swift, physical tests, genetic scans, psychological exams. Of 300 children aged 10 to 12, only 7 passed. I was one of them. Matt wasn't. I remember the look in his eyes as the chaplain's servoskull scanned him and moved on without recording his data. Relief and disappointment tangled in his gaze. I envied him even as pride swelled in me. No goodbyes. No last dinners. No final nights in our beds. Chaplain Morley explained that attachments were weaknesses, distractions from the trials ahead. We were no longer children of Ashcombe but aspirants of the Crimson Ravens, servants of the Emperor. Our old selves were irrelevant impediments to becoming angels. The journey to the chapter's fortress monastery took 3 months aboard the battle barge Litany of Fury. 3 months in cramped dormitories with boys from worlds I'd never heard of. Farmers like me, gang fighters from London's underbelly, tribal warriors from death worlds, and noble-born youths from civilized planets. The chapter cast its net wide, seeking not just strength but genetic compatibility with the gene seed of their primarch. During the voyage, we learned our first lesson: expendability. Of the 47 aspirants who'd boarded, only 32 survived. Some died from failed surgeries as apothecaries implanted organs. Others snapped under relentless training. A few simply broke. Those were the lucky ones, they died quickly. The fortress monastery of the Crimson Ravens sits atop Blackthorn Moon, orbiting a dead star in a forgotten system. An impossible structure carved from living rock, reinforced with adamantium bulkheads built to withstand orbital bombardment. Gothic spires claw toward the void like fingers grasping for salvation, each housing training chambers, meditation cells, and relics recovered from across the galaxy. Walking its corridors for the first time, I felt the weight of history crush me. 10,000 years of war echoed in these halls. Thousands of aspirants had walked these paths, and most had died trying. The walls whispered of failures, sacrifices, boys who dreamed of angels and found only death in the darkness. Our true trials began immediately. The chapter called it the proving, but it was merely the first of many tests designed to break us down and rebuild us. For 6 months, we endured physical conditioning that would kill grown men. We ran obstacle courses in powered armor too heavy for our bones, fought servitors programmed to maim, studied the Codex Astartes until tactical doctrine haunted our dreams. And then came the pain tests, enduring agony while reciting strategies, tested on knowledge while agony clawed at our minds. Of the 32, only 18 survived the first month. The rest lie in unmarked graves beneath the monastery, their names recorded but never spoken. We were forbidden to mourn them. Grief was weakness. Those who showed signs of attachment faced further conditioning, drugs, hypnotic programming, even brain surgery. I learned to stop caring about the names of boys who vanished. It was survival, a necessary amputation of empathy that would serve me well in the centuries ahead. The first organ implant came at the end of our initial training, the secondary heart, a backup cardiovascular system to keep me alive when wounds would kill normal men. The surgery took place in ancient operating theaters, humming with power and filled with apothecaries' precise servo-arms. I was awake, pain coursing through me. They said learning to function in agony was vital. They were right. Over the following years, I would be shot, stabbed, burned, frozen, poisoned, crushed more times than I can count. Compartmentalizing pain kept me alive. But it cost me something deeper, something I didn't realize was slipping away until it was gone. The months blurred into a haze of more surgeries and trials. Bone reinforcements, muscle densification, blood enhancements to survive in toxic atmospheres. Each implant brought me closer to the chapter's ideal and further from the boy who once dreamed beneath Ashcombe's copper skies. I stopped dreaming of Mum's bread. I stopped dreaming of Matt. I stopped dreaming at all. By the time I received my 13th implant, the catalepsian node that kept me alert without rest, I had forgotten what it felt like to miss home, or even that I had a home. The final implant was the black carapace, the interface that merged me with the machine spirits of armor and weaponry. The most dangerous procedure. 4 of 11 aspirants died during the operation, their bodies rejecting the synthetic tissue. We watched them convulse in the recovery chambers, their screams fading into silence. I felt nothing. That absence of feeling was proof my transformation was complete. I had become something that could watch children die without grief or compassion, something focused solely on tactical objectives. I had become what the Imperium needed me to be, a weapon. As I knelt before the altar of the Emperor in the monastery's reclusium, swearing my oath, I rose no longer Cassius the farm boy but Brother Cassius of the Crimson Raven's 3rd Company. My old name was recorded but never spoken. That boy was dead. What stood in his place was empty, purposeful, and utterly lost. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a whisper lingered, a question that no amount of conditioning could silence. What had I truly become? The fortress around me was silent, but beyond the walls, a storm was gathering. Something was coming. Something that even centuries of war had not prepared me for. The first time I stepped onto a battlefield as Brother Cassius was aboard the strike cruiser Righteous Fury, bound for the Forge world of Blackmore 7. A sprawling industrial planet shrouded in perpetual twilight, its skies thick with smoke and the endless hum of machinery. Reports had come in of a chaos uprising deep within the city's manufacturing districts. Workers twisted by forbidden rituals and corrupted tech. The 6-week journey through the warp was a relentless cycle of drills and training. The ship's corridors were transformed into mock factory floors and cramped alleys, where we practiced room-to-room combat against servitors programmed with the tactics of known enemies. We learned to anticipate the unpredictable, to move as a single deadly unit rather than a collection of individuals. Personal glory was a luxury none of us could afford, they told us. We were components of a single weapon, 11 parts fused into one unstoppable force. If one fell, the others adapted instantly, no hesitation, no mourning. I learned to step over fallen brothers without a second thought, to strip their armor for spare ammo if supplies ran low. It was a brutal lesson but necessary. When we dropped onto Blackmore 7, the air was thick with the smell of burning metal and chemical decay. The manufacturums should have roared with life, but the streets were eerily silent, save for the distant drone of automated systems. Warning runes flickered from vox casters mounted on factory walls, broadcasting quarantine protocols and curfews in high Gothic. Our squad moved through the shadowed streets, power armor clanking softly against the cracked pavement. Sergeant Thorne raised his fist, a silent command to halt, and we scanned the windows of the nearest complex. Shadows shifted inside. Figures moved with unnatural coordination, waiting. The first shots came from above, autogun rounds pinging harmlessly off our ceramite plates but betraying enemy positions. The attackers were factory workers, but no ordinary laborers. Their flesh was twisted and grafted with alien machinery, limbs sprouting wires and tubes in grotesque defiance of Imperial technology. Faces bore the marks of warp mutations, eyes glowing faintly with unnatural light. Our bolters sang hymns of purification, mass-reactive shells tearing through flesh and metal alike. Yet for every cultist we felled, 2 more emerged from the shadows. The uprising was well organized and prepared. The battle raged for hours, weaving through 17 manufacturums, each more twisted and corrupted than the last. Finally, deep in the reactor chamber of the primary complex, we found the source, a shrine of flesh and machine, pulsing with malevolent energy. At its center stood a figure once human, now a vessel for the dark powers of the warp. Its voice echoed with the cries of dead workers, promising forbidden knowledge and power beyond the Emperor's grasp. I raised my bolter and fired 6 shots straight into its chest. The abomination collapsed into a writhing mass of corrupted flesh and metal, its death cry reverberating through the chamber as the shrine flickered and died. Victory was ours. The corruption would wither without its heart, and the industrial output of Blackmore 7 could be restored. But as we prepared to withdraw, Brother Varian's quiet observation cut through the aftermath. These corrupted workers had fought with desperate courage, defending something they believed in, something beyond mere survival. They died with purpose. We, by contrast, had killed without emotion. No anger, no sorrow, no satisfaction, only cold efficiency. We were perfect soldiers, but something essential had been stripped away. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between battles, I would wonder what it felt like to care about something enough to die for it, to believe beyond duty. But I knew I never would. The conditioning that made me a warrior had also made me incapable of such faith. I fought because I was programmed to fight. I protected humanity not from love, but from duty. And duty, as I was learning, could be a lonely thing. Our next deployment took us to the industrial city of Grenton on the planet Castellan 4. A sprawling urban maze where the line between friend and foe blurred beneath layers of concrete and desperation. Reports spoke of a rebellion sparked by economic hardship, but for us it was just another mission. Restore order, enforce imperial will. I remember the night we moved through the residential districts. Streets lined with crumbling brick terraces, windows shuttered against the cold, and the smell of burnt wood lingering in the air. Civilians had turned their homes into fortresses, barricading doors with furniture, wielding kitchen knives, and, heartbreakingly, using their own children as shields. It was a brutal reality that no amount of training could soften. I recall one moment with unnerving clarity. A woman, perhaps in her early 30s, clutching an infant, trying to lead the child through a narrow alley. Her face was pale, eyes wide with fear but determined. She was unarmed, a mother desperate to save her son from the chaos consuming their world. But she was in our way. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough for Sergeant Garavas to lob a frag grenade into the building they were heading toward. The blast was deafening, and the woman fell, a single bolt round piercing her as I advanced. The infant died in the explosion moments later. I felt nothing. No sorrow, no guilt. She was a tactical problem, one that required a tactical solution. Her death served the mission, and the infant was an acceptable casualty in the grand scheme. These were facts, not tragedies. Later, during the meditation period, I found myself trying to recall her face in detail. Not out of grief, but because I couldn't form a clear image. She was human, female, around 30, but beyond that, her features dissolved into a blur. She was an obstacle, nothing more. This troubled me, not for emotional reasons, but because it hinted at a flaw in my conditioning. If I couldn't remember the faces of those I'd killed, how could I accurately assess the population? How could I distinguish between innocent civilians and potential threats? How could I read the subtle cues that might inform better tactics? I brought these concerns to Chaplain Morley during confession. He listened with his usual mechanical attentiveness and assured me that this was success, not failure. Emotional detachment was necessary. Attachment was weakness. Forgetting the faces of obstacles ensured focus and efficiency. He was right. Over the years, that detachment became my shield. I moved through civilian zones without hesitation, made brutal triage decisions, and sacrificed squadmates without grief. Victory became a technical achievement, survival mere continuation. But sometimes, late at night, I would catch myself wondering what it might feel like to protect something worth caring about. To have a cause that stirred more than obedience. Yet the answer always slipped away, buried beneath layers of conditioning. We were angels without heaven, guardians without love. And the world of Castellan IV was just another battlefield where the cost of that detachment became painfully clear. Years into my service, I was redeployed to Vos Prime, a grim, industrial planet where the air hung thick with soot, and the endless clang of factory machinery hammered the rhythm of daily life. The workers there had risen against the planetary governor's edict to increase production quotas while cutting their rations. Nothing heretical, nothing corrupted, just desperate people pushed beyond breaking point. We arrived with orders to suppress the uprising swiftly, to restore the flow of resources vital to the Imperium's war effort. The locals resisted fiercely, barricading themselves in factories and tenements, wielding whatever they could lay hands on. Makeshift clubs, rusted tools, even sharpened lengths of rail. Our squad moved through the smoke-choked streets, power armor clanking heavily against the cracked pavement. Sergeant Harrow led the way, his voice steady over the vox. Clear and contain. No hesitation. I remember the faces of the workers. Not enemies, not heretics, just men and women drained of hope. Their eyes held something I hadn't seen in years. Defiance born not of fanaticism, but of survival. They fought for a future where their children might eat without fear. The battle was brutal but efficient. Bolter fire tore through barricades. Grenades shattered doors. The workers fell one by one, their resistance crushed beneath the weight of imperial might. By campaign's end, Vos Prime was compliant. Factory output soared. Tithes flowed uninterrupted, and the governor's grip tightened. The workers' living conditions worsened, but that was a price deemed acceptable for the greater good. I stood among the ruins of a shattered tenement, the acrid smoke swirling in my nostrils, and felt an odd emptiness. We had preserved the Imperium's control, yes, but at what cost? These were humans, my own kind, reduced to cogs in a vast, merciless machine. Yet I felt nothing. No anger. No regret. Only the cold satisfaction of mission accomplished. It was a stark reminder of the contradiction at the heart of my existence. Created to protect humanity, I had spent centuries enforcing authority over it, suppressing those who dared dream of something better. The conditioning kept my mind focused, my heart sealed away. I was a weapon forged for obedience, not compassion. But sometimes, beneath the armor, beneath the conditioning, a small voice whispered, what if protection meant more than control? What if the people I fought were not enemies but victims? I pushed the thought aside. There was no room for doubt in the Crimson Ravens. And yet, as the fires of rebellion smoldered across the Imperium, I wondered, had I become the very darkness I was sworn to fight? After decades of enforcing imperial will on troubled worlds, I was assigned to the Death Watch, a brotherhood tasked with hunting alien threats beyond imperial space. Finally, a mission that promised clarity. Enemies who were not human, not one of us. No moral gray, just pure, unambiguous targets. My first deployment with the Death Watch brought me to the diplomatic outpost on Pavones, a small, overlooked world nestled in the Damocles Gulf. A delegation of Taus, an alien species, had arrived proposing trade, advanced medical technology in exchange for raw materials. Several planetary governors saw opportunity, hoping to improve their citizens' lives while keeping tithes flowing to the Imperium. But the Ordo Xenos saw threat. Not military aggression, but the danger of diplomacy itself. Alien influence creeping into human affairs was unacceptable. Orders came down. Eliminate the delegation, erase all traces, maintain plausible deniability. The strike was surgical. We breached the grand dining hall during a formal dinner, bolters roaring as we cut down 43 Taus delegates, 17 human negotiators, and 26 civilians caught in the crossfire. The planetary governor survived, shielded by loyal security, but was later executed for treason. Tactically flawless. No loose ends. The mission erased any chance of alien contact, preserving Imperial isolation. But recovered intelligence complicated the picture. The Taus weren't conquerors. They were refugees, fleeing tyrannid swarms ravaging their home worlds. Their offers were genuine attempts to save lives, to build alliances that might benefit both species. We had killed them for it. This shouldn't have mattered. Aliens were aliens. Their survival was irrelevant to my duty. But for the first time in centuries, I questioned whether mission success equated to victory. Had we sacrificed strategic opportunities for rigid ideology? If protecting humanity truly mattered, shouldn't we embrace alliances that strengthened us? Shouldn't survival trump dogma? Yet, the conditioning that made me a warrior silenced such questions. I observed contradictions without judgment. I saw tactical alternatives without choosing them. I served because I was programmed to serve. Still, as the stars passed in endless silence outside the righteous fury, a cold knot settled in my gut. The uncomfortable doubt that perhaps the greatest threat wasn't the aliens out there, but the empire within. The mission that would forever haunt me came during my 5th century of service, on a world so secret that its name was erased from all imperial records the moment our orders were complete. A world that once teemed with 17 billion souls, all of them marked for extinction. This was no rebellion, no alien incursion. It was an extermination. The planet, codenamed Sanctuary, in whispered corridors, had been the site of an unsanctioned genetic experiment. Humans modified for survival in the harshest conditions. Lungs adapted to thin atmospheres. Skin hardened against brutal radiation. Bones dense enough to bear crushing gravity. The Adeptus Mechanicus had promised these enhancements would open new frontiers, but the Imperium saw them as abominations, a threat to the sacred, unchanging nature of humanity. Our orders were clear. Eliminate every trace of this heresy. No survivors. No records. We descended upon Sanctuary with ruthless efficiency. The surface was hostile, barren plains scarred by ancient volcanic flows, cities carved deep underground to shield from radiation. The modified humans fought with a fierce, desperate intelligence I had never encountered before. Not mindless zealots or corrupted cultists, but families defending their homes, their children, their future. I remember the final assault vividly. The last underground refuge held 12,000 souls. Men, women, children born after our arrival, and elders who had witnessed the rise and fall of their civilization. They were unarmed, not pleading for mercy, but singing. 12,000 voices raised in haunting harmony, echoing through the tunnels. Songs of love, loss, hope, a final testament to their humanity. We killed them all. Our bolters sang their hymns as mass-reactive shells tore through flesh and stone alike. The music faded in broken fragments until only silence remained. From the command deck of Righteous Fury, I watched as orbital bombardment turned Sanctuary's surface into molten glass. Cyclonic torpedoes cracked its crust. Virus bombs sterilized every living thing. In 6 hours, 17 billion lives were erased, and the star it orbited would soon be stricken from imperial charts. The mission was a success, no evidence remained, no trace of the genetic project survived. Humanity's perfect form remained unchallenged. Yet, as the world burned, a distant memory stirred deep within me. The taste of my mother's bread, honeyed and warm, baked before dawn in the fields of Ashcombe. A fragment of a past I thought long dead. For the first time in centuries, I felt the weight of what had been lost. Not just lives, but the very meaning of humanity itself. They had died singing because they remembered what it meant to be human. And I had become something that could kill that song without hearing it. Centuries blurred into one another after Sanctuary's destruction. Battles, victories, losses, they all merged into an endless cycle. I earned my stripes, rising through the ranks from aspirant to veteran, then sergeant. Commanding squads, shaping tactics, training fresh recruits in the grim art of war. My kill count grew beyond chapter averages. My squads executed missions with brutal efficiency. I became the living weapon the Crimson Ravens prided themselves on. Yet, with every promotion, the truth became clearer. We weren't defenders of humanity's future. We were its wardens. On Morian, we crushed a religious sect whose beliefs strayed even slightly from imperial orthodoxy. 40,000 civilians died in 3 weeks. Entire settlements razed. Heresy was a crime punishable by extinction. On Necroanda, we eradicated gangs disrupting tithe collections. The gangs were vicious, but so were the corporate overlords exploiting workers beyond acceptable limits. With gang resistance gone, working conditions worsened, yet tax revenues rose. On Vos Prime, we suppressed uprisings sparked by starvation and oppression. Compliance increased, but hope withered. Each campaign was a tactical success, each one tightening the Imperium's grip. But the faces of those we killed remained faceless, mere statistics in mission logs. I trained my battle brothers to see the same. Emotional detachment was survival. Sympathy was a liability. One evening, after a particularly brutal operation, I found myself staring at a shard of shattered mirror in the mess hall. The face that stared back, hardened, unyielding, hollow, was a stranger. I had become a tool wielded by faceless administrators, a blade cutting down humanity to preserve order. A guardian angel? Perhaps only in name. Yet beneath the ceramite, a flicker remained, a question unspoken. If we are meant to protect humanity, why do we so often destroy it? But the answer was beyond me, buried beneath layers of conditioning and duty. And so I fought on. Because I must. Because I am Cassius. Because there is no other choice. After centuries enforcing imperial law against human foes, I was assigned to the Death Watch once more, a brotherhood dedicated to hunting Xenos threats. Finally, enemies clear and unquestionable. Or so I thought. Our mission brought us to Pavones, a quiet world where a delegation of Taus, slender, silver-skinned aliens, had arrived seeking trade. They offered advanced medical tech in exchange for raw materials, promising relief for their refugee populations displaced by tyrannid swarms. Some governors saw opportunity, others saw treason. The Ordo Xenos declared the negotiations a threat to imperial security. We were ordered to eliminate the delegation discreetly. The strike was swift and brutal. Bolters cracked through the elegant dining hall, cutting down 43 Taus, 17 human negotiators, and 26 civilians. The governor survived but was later executed for treason. Mission accomplished. The threat was neutralized, imperial isolation preserved. But recovered intelligence painted a different picture. The Taus were desperate, offering genuine aid to save lives, not conquer. Their empire struggled to support refugees, and their proposals could have forged valuable alliances. We had killed hope. For the first time in centuries, I questioned the cost of victory. Had dogma blinded us to opportunity? Was rigid ideology undermining imperial survival? Yet the conditioning held firm. Doubt could not turn to defiance. I observed contradictions without judgment, tactical alternatives without choice. Still, as the stars slipped past the righteous fury, a chill settled in my bones. The enemy was not always clear. Sometimes it lurked within. And in that silence, I wondered, Was the Imperium's greatest threat its own unyielding will? The centuries since that nameless world have blended into an endless cycle of deployment and victory, conflict and resolution, service without purpose or satisfaction or hope of anything beyond continued service. I have killed millions of enemies of the Imperium, protected billions of Imperial citizens, and preserved the stability of countless worlds against threats both internal and external. I have served the Emperor faithfully for over 400 years, and I will continue serving until battle damage or age finally claims my enhanced physiology. I am a hero of the Imperium, a living legend, a guardian angel protecting humanity from the darkness beyond the stars. Children throughout Imperial space dream of becoming what I have become. Imagine themselves wielding the weapons I carry and wearing the armor that has turned aside countless attacks. They see me as the embodiment of everything noble and pure about human civilization, a figure worthy of worship and emulation. They do not know that I can no longer remember why their dreams matter. They do not know that I have forgotten what it feels like to care about anything beyond the completion of assigned objectives. They do not know that I have become something that can protect them without understanding what makes them worth protecting. Something that can serve their interests without comprehending what those interests entail. They do not know that in becoming their guardian I have ceased to be one of them. And perhaps that is the greatest victory chaos could achieve against the Imperium. Not the corruption of its servants, but the creation of servants so pure in their dedication that they can no longer comprehend the value of what they serve. Not the destruction of humanity, but the transformation of humanity's protectors into something that preserves human life without preserving human meaning. We are the Adeptus. We are the Emperor's finest warriors. We are the shield that stands between mankind and the darkness that would devour it. We are no longer human, and we have forgotten why humanity matters. But we will continue serving. We will continue fighting. We will continue killing in the Emperor's name until nothing remains of us but the echoes of bolter fire and the memory of wars whose purpose we can no longer recall. We are angels without heaven, guardians without understanding, protectors without love. We are exactly what we were designed to be. Yet, as I stand here in the armory, crimson paint drying on my ceramite plates, a whisper stirs in the void, a shadow of a forgotten past. Somewhere, beyond the stars, a secret waits to be uncovered, a truth that could shatter the very foundation of everything I have become. And I fear that when it emerges, nothing will ever be the same. The whisper gnaws at the edges of my consciousness, faint but insistent, like the distant toll of a bell long silenced. It speaks of a forgotten world, a hidden truth buried beneath layers of imperial secrecy and betrayal, a secret that could unravel the very fabric of my existence and the chapter one have sworn to serve. In the quiet moments, when the armor's weight presses down and the fortress monastery's shadows lengthen, I find myself haunted by fragments. A symbol glimpsed in a shattered relic, a name erased from the archives, a voice from beyond the void calling my true name, Cassius and something more. I have been a weapon forged in the crucible of war, a blade honed to perfection, but even the sharpest steel can crack. The memories I buried, the humanity I forsook, stir beneath the surface like embers waiting to ignite. What if the Emperor's chosen are not the saviors we believe ourselves to be, but instruments of a far darker design? What if the price we pay for salvation is our very souls? I have lived for centuries in servitude, bound by oaths and implants, yet now I stand at the precipice of doubt, a void where certainty once reigned. The halls of the Crimson Ravens whisper secrets, and soon, I will uncover them. The next mission will not be fought with bolter fire or blade, but with the fragile weapon of truth. And as I tighten my gauntlets and prepare to step into the unknown, I know one thing with absolute clarity. The path ahead will demand more than obedience. It will demand the rediscovery of what it truly means to be human. And when that reckoning comes, the echoes of war will fade, replaced by a question that has haunted me since the beginning. Who am I beneath the armor? The answer awaits, shrouded in darkness. And I will face it alone.